Abandoned by her cheating millionaire husband, wife finds true love. Now he regrets everything. Sit back and prepare to be swept into a story of heartbreak, resilience, and the transformative power of true love. Imagine a young woman, deeply devoted and full of hope, only to be cruelly abandoned by the man who promised her the world. He was a millionaire playboy who built his empire on charm and deception, leaving her stranded and broken-hearted. Yet from the ashes of betrayal, she would rise again, finding in another man the faithful love she thought was lost forever. And when her cheating husband realizes his mistake, he can only watch helplessly, racked by the regret he never thought he'd feel. Eliana Beaumont was never the type to dream beyond her means. Growing up in a modest home in suburban Atlanta, she'd imagined a life built on simple joys, a cozy house, a loving family, and a warm sense of belonging. But fate had other plans. In her mid-20s, she met the suave and charismatic Nicholas Legrand at a charity gala. Nicholas was already a self-made millionaire by age 30, known for his flash and confidence. He was sponsoring the event, striding around in an impeccably tailored suit with a gleaming Rolex on his wrist, mesmerizing everyone with his polished charm. The evening she caught his eye felt like a scene from a fairy tale under the shimmering chandeliers. With the strains of a string quartet in the background, Nicholas offered Eliana a glass of champagne. He introduced himself with a grin that made her knees tremble. From the start, his every gesture signaled grandeur. Eliana felt like Cinderella, certain this moment was a cosmic sign she had found her prince. Within a whirlwind of dates, lavish dinners at five-star restaurants, weekend trips aboard his yacht, and roses so numerous they flooded her tiny apartment, the two were engaged. Life felt like a dream on fast forward. Eliana dared to believe in happily ever after. Before meeting Nicholas, Eliana had been content with her office job at a local non-profit, living from paycheck to paycheck, but finding purpose in helping others. When she married him, her new reality was like being thrust onto a stage filled with bright lights and towering expectations. Nicholas bought them a penthouse in the heart of Manhattan, with panoramic views of Central Park. Expensive art adorned the walls, from Renoir prints to a genuine Dale Chihuly glass sculpture that dazzled beneath the recessed lighting. At first, Eliana was swept up in the excitement. She attended high society galas in gowns worth thousands of dollars. She sipped cappuccinos at the Starbucks on Fifth Avenue, listening in on conversations filled with designer labels and exotic vacations. She was introduced to Nicholas's influential friends, CEOs, venture capitalists, and even a film producer who name-dropped Hollywood celebrities at will. But beneath the glamour, Eliana struggled to find her place. She attended charity events, not as an eager volunteer, but as a socialite expected to smile and fundraise. The surface of this new lifestyle gleamed with sophistication, yet something nagged at her heart. Nicholas was often absent, business deals taking priority over dinners at home. Still, she held on, convinced that every marriage had its rough edges in the beginning. The first real argument erupted just a month after the honeymoon. Eliana had wanted to visit her aging parents in Atlanta, but Nicholas insisted she accompany him on a weekend business trip to the Hamptons. She tried to reason with him, explaining her father's declining health. But Nicholas wouldn't budge. "I'm sealing a major merger," he said sharply, "and I need you by my side." This small dispute hinted at a larger issue. Nicholas was accustomed to always getting his way. Eliana could see the tension in his voice, the impatience in his eyes, whenever she dared to have a differing opinion. His dismissive attitude toward her concerns stung deeply, though she tried to justify it. "He's busy," she told herself. "He's used to pressure. I have to support him if I want this marriage to work." Yet the frustration lingered, building up like static electricity in the air. Eliana began noticing more subtle changes. The late-night phone calls he took in hushed tones, the business trips that seemed to pop up out of nowhere, the text messages he guarded carefully. Deep in her heart, she recognized that something was off, but still she clung to the hope that she was imagining it all. After all, she loved him. The moment that shattered her illusions came on a Tuesday morning. Nicholas was away on yet another urgent business trip, and Eliana found herself restless. Determined to tidy the penthouse, she ventured into his office, a room usually off-limits to her. She'd been searching for an important document he'd left behind when, in a rarely used drawer, she found a folder brimming with printed photographs. With trembling hands, she flipped through image after image of Nicholas with another woman, tall, raven-haired, and always draped in designer dresses. They were laughing, hugging, and even kissing in front of famous landmarks like the Eiffel Tower and the Taj Mahal. Each picture was a punch to Eliana's gut. She felt the walls of her carefully constructed life closing in, suffocating her with betrayal. Her heart hammered in her chest as she sank into the leather office chair. Tears blurred her vision, smearing the images. There was no plausible explanation that could wash this away. The evidence of his infidelity was so blatant, so indisputable. She felt dizzy, grappling with denial and the burning sting of betrayal. Despite her shattered spirit, a quiet determination rose within her. This would not break her. She needed answers immediately. Eliana paced the penthouse floor, her stomach churning with anxiety. She debated whether to call Nicholas and confront him outright or wait until he returned to face him in person. Rage warred with heartbreak inside her chest. She could still smell his cologne clinging to the sofa cushions, a reminder of the life they shared and the deception beneath it. When Nicholas finally returned late that evening, she stood in the foyer, folder of damning photos clutched to her chest. The look in her eyes was enough to freeze him mid-step. For a moment, neither spoke, locked in a standoff of shattered trust. Finally, Eliana's trembling voice broke the silence. "Who is she, Nicholas?" she demanded, lifting the folder so he could see. His normally poised demeanor faltered. Fear flashed across his features, followed by exasperation. He stammered out excuses. "It's not what it looks like, and they're old pictures from before I met you," but his words fell flat. Eliana knew better. Driven by desperation, Nicholas tried to soothe her with gentle touches, but she recoiled. Nothing he said could whitewash the evidence of his betrayal. In that instant, Eliana felt her love for him teeter on the brink. She wouldn't settle for a life built on lies. Over the next few days, Nicholas waged a relentless campaign to keep Eliana from leaving. He replaced her heartbreak with confusion by insisting on half-truths and manipulations. He claimed the mysterious, raven-haired woman was just a client he'd romanced for business advantages. While it was unethical, he argued it wasn't a real emotional affair. He also swore that those photos were mostly from business events he had to attend. But Eliana sensed that at best, this was Nicholas rewriting the story to salvage his image. The heartbreak and shock had morphed into a dull ache inside her. She saw through his empty words still. She hesitated. Could she truly walk away from a marriage that had promised her so much? Could she forfeit the dream life and the love she once believed to be genuine? She tried to cling to any possible hope. Maybe Nicholas was telling the truth about it being purely transactional. Perhaps she misunderstood. The whispered phone calls, the business trips, the suspicious messages. Eliana's mind spun in circles, piecing together countless red flags. As the days crawled by, she found herself living in a strange purgatory, fearful of her future, but also unwilling to accept that the man she'd devoted her heart to had deceived her so thoroughly. Just as Eliana began to entertain the possibility of forgiveness, fate intervened with a brutal dose of reality. One evening, while she was in the penthouse's spacious living room, flipping through channels, A breaking news segment flashed across the screen. Paparazzi shots of Nicholas at a luxury resort in the Maldives appeared, his arms wrapped around the same raven-haired woman from the photographs. The date stamp was just 2 days prior when he'd claimed to be on a men-only business retreat. Eliana's eyes stung with tears, her body rigid with anger. This was no longer a question of misunderstanding. She had proof that Nicholas had never stopped seeing his mistress. His urgent trips were an elaborate cover for romantic getaways. It was both insulting and devastating to witness how little he respected their marriage. Fueled by righteous fury, Eliana stormed into the bedroom. She stuffed clothes into a suitcase with shaking hands, her breath coming out in ragged gasps. By the time Nicholas got home, the news clip had already gone viral on social media. Eliana met him at the door, wearing her coat and holding her bag. Her voice trembled, but her resolve was unwavering. "You've lied to me for the last time, Nicholas. I'm done." Eliana left the penthouse that night, her heart pounding like a drum in her ears. She found temporary refuge in a friend's spare bedroom, a far cry from the opulence she'd grown used to. Her friend, Ava, tried to comfort her with warm hugs and supportive words, but no amount of sympathy could quell the devastation and rage swirling within Eliana. Within days, news of Nicholas's indiscretions spread through tabloids and social media. Scandalized headlines read, "Millionaire mogul's double life exposed," and Nicholas Legrand's cheating scandal rocks Manhattan's elite. Eliana felt humiliated, but she also sensed a curious empowerment. The public now knew exactly what he'd done. Then the final blow landed. Eliana received a lawsuit from Nicholas, demanding an annulment of their marriage. His legal team argued that she was unfit to be his wife, citing ridiculous claims that she'd withheld personal information. It was a brazen, ruthless strategy to cut her off financially and preserve his assets. Nicholas clearly aimed to crush her spirit and leave her penniless. For Eliana, it was a jarring wake-up call. The husband she had adored wasn't content merely to deceive her. Now he was willing to drag her through the mud to protect his fortune. She steeled herself for a legal battle, determined not to let him rewrite her story. As the lawsuit raged on, Eliana realized that clinging to anger would only devour her from the inside. Instead, she found refuge in a small but reputable law firm recommended by Ava. They listened compassionately, vowing to help Eliana claim what she rightfully deserved. But beyond the court proceedings, she needed personal healing too. Eliana began exploring her new independence. She revisited her old passion for helping people. With a small savings account she'd set aside during her marriage, she volunteered part-time at a local shelter. The sense of purpose she felt handing out meals, comforting those who felt forgotten, was a balm to her battered soul. It reminded her of the person she was before Nicholas's whirlwind of wealth had taken over her life. One sunny afternoon, while sipping coffee at a modest cafe far from the lavish Starbucks on Fifth Avenue she used to frequent, Eliana looked out at the bustling street. It struck her that her hardships had also led her to rediscover her own strength. Each day without Nicholas was a step away from false illusions and a stride closer to her authentic self. She was still grappling with heartbreak, but at least she no longer felt trapped inside a gilded cage. In the midst of the legal chaos, Eliana received a surprising email from an old acquaintance, Cassidy Brooks, a socialite she had once met at one of Nicholas's extravagant parties. Cassidy was known in their circles as a high-strung fashionista who thrived on gossip. Initially, Eliana was wary of Cassidy's motives, but the email's tone was unexpectedly earnest. Cassidy revealed she had once dated Nicholas before Eliana came into the picture. She'd witnessed firsthand his manipulative ways and the sting of his betrayals. Although their relationship hadn't been publicized, Cassidy claimed she had a folder of documents showing Nicholas's shady business dealings and pattern of emotional abuse. "I'm tired of watching him hurt women," Cassidy wrote. "He tried to silence me, but I refused to let him get away with this." Skeptical yet curious, Eliana agreed to meet Cassidy at a discreet diner on the outskirts of town. Over cups of lukewarm coffee, Cassidy slid a flash drive across the table. "It's all here," she whispered, fear edging her voice, as Eliana examined the file's photographs, emails, bank statements. Her heart pounded with renewed purpose. She had an ally, someone who understood her ordeal. More importantly, she had the ammunition needed to confront Nicholas on every level. Eliana forwarded Cassidy's files to her legal team. The documents revealed not just Nicholas's infidelity, but also questionable deals where he'd leveraged insider information to expand his empire. Adding to the pile were messages that exposed how he'd methodically strung along multiple women for social or financial gain. These revelations sent shockwaves through Eliana's already battered psyche. The man she had trusted enough to marry was even more deceitful than she'd imagined. Armed with this new evidence, Eliana's attorneys escalated the divorce proceedings. They challenged Nicholas's demands for an annulment, insisting he shoulder responsibility for emotional damages. Their case now had teeth. Nicholas's high-powered legal team fired back with threats and intimidation tactics, but Eliana held her ground. She wasn't just defending herself, she was standing up for every person Nicholas had manipulated. The media caught wind of the new developments. Overnight, Nicholas went from a high-flying entrepreneur to a man under scrutiny, his name tainted by scandal. In interviews, Eliana remained poised, refusing to give tabloids the melodrama they craved. Privately, she prayed for the strength to see the legal battle through to the end. The world was seeing Nicholas Legrand's true colors, and for once, she no longer felt like a voiceless victim. Amid the drawn-out court battles, Eliana was on the verge of emotional exhaustion. She balanced legal appointments, mountains of paperwork, and the persistent media buzz. Each day felt like a fight for her own credibility. Still, she pressed on, fueled by a mounting sense of resolve. She couldn't let Nicholas or anyone else turn her into a footnote in his sordid history. One cloudy morning, on her way to meet her lawyer, Eliana bumped quite literally into a tall, soft-spoken man juggling a portfolio of architectural blueprints in the law firm's lobby. His papers went flying. Embarrassed, Eliana scrambled to help him gather the strewn documents. He thanked her with a shy smile and introduced himself as James McAllister, an architect who had just joined the firm's team as a consultant for a property settlement case. Eliana felt a curious warmth emanate from James. There was a kindness in his eyes, a genuineness that stood in stark contrast to Nicholas's cold swagger. They chatted briefly, exchanging polite small talk. Though it was just a fleeting encounter, Eliana walked away with an unexpected sense of calm. It had been far too long since she'd felt anything akin to human connection that wasn't tainted by gossip or legal hostility. Over the following weeks, Eliana found herself crossing paths with James more often at the law firm. Sometimes they shared a friendly wave in the hallway. Other times they commiserated over the complexity of their respective cases. Their interactions were brief, never delving into deeply personal territory. Yet every conversation left Eliana with a gentle sense of optimism. One evening, after a particularly draining court session, James spotted Eliana in the building's cafe. Staring blankly into a cup of tea, he approached her table and hesitated. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, voice tinged with concern. She nodded, grateful for the company. In a matter-of-fact but compassionate tone, James asked if she was okay. Eliana, typically guarded, surprised herself by opening up, giving him a cursory outline of the betrayal and the ongoing legal saga. James listened intently without judgment. He admitted he'd heard rumors around the office, but said he preferred to hear the story from her directly. As Eliana talked, she found solace in his attentive presence. He didn't pry or offer condescending advice. Instead, he let her speak. By the time she finished, Eliana was flushed with relief. In James's earnest gaze, she recognized a man whose empathy felt refreshingly authentic. One day, James invited Eliana to step outside the stuffy legal environment and grab lunch. They strolled to a nearby sandwich shop, a mom and pop establishment that reminded Eliana of the neighborhood joints she used to love in Atlanta. Over simple turkey sandwiches, she got to know the quiet architect better. James told her about his humble upbringing in a small town in Ohio, how he'd lost his father early and had worked 2 jobs through college to become an architect. He specialized in sustainable, community-based projects like renovating homeless shelters or designing affordable housing complexes. His passion for social impact lit up his otherwise subdued demeanor. Eliana felt her guard slip further. In the midst of her personal storm, James was like an anchor, steady, deliberate, and empathetic. Their shared interest in helping vulnerable populations formed a natural bond. He confessed he had been wary about working with wealthy clients who cared only for profit, but that the law firm had assured him he could pick projects that aligned with his values. Both of them were tired of superficial relationships. Eliana had seen where that led, and James wanted genuine human connection. Over that lunch, they each found a confidant, discovering that sometimes strangers can become the best allies. Back in the courtroom, the tension between Eliana and Nicholas was palpable. Nicholas's lawyers painted Eliana as a manipulative gold digger who had always been after his fortune. They cherry-picked moments from her social media posts, pictures of the lavish parties, the expensive gifts, and twisted them to imply she had been complicit in every aspect of Nicholas's lifestyle. But Eliana's legal team fought back with Cassidy's evidence. A series of emails detailing Nicholas's extramarital affairs, his shady business deals, and even his attempts to buy off witnesses painted a damning picture of his true nature. The judge took note, and the tide in the courtroom began to shift. The mention of real bank accounts complete with transactions from major institutions like J.P. Morgan Chase gave an authenticity that couldn't be ignored. On the sidelines, tabloids and gossip columns feasted on every revelation. Reporters lurked outside the courthouse, clamoring for quotes from either side. Eliana, however, refused to be baited into salacious soundbites. She focused on the facts, on her goal of disentangling herself legally and financially from Nicholas's web of deceit. While the scandal raged on, she could feel her personal life slowly taking shape beyond the chaos, especially in the moments she spent with James, who brought her an oasis of calm in a desert of turmoil. One evening, as Eliana finalized some paperwork in the law firm's conference room, James passed by and noticed her exhaustion. He leaned into the doorway, lightly tapping on it to announce his presence. "You look like you could use a break," he said with a sympathetic smile. Eliana couldn't help but grin back. She took him up on his offer to step outside for a quick walk. The city lights sparkled around them, and for a moment, Eliana realized she was seeing New York differently, no longer through the lens of heartbreak and betrayal, but through eyes curious about what the next chapter of her life might hold. James's voice broke the silence as they strolled past a row of small boutiques. "You know," he said, sounding uncharacteristically nervous, "I've been thinking about you a lot lately. Would you maybe want to grab dinner sometime? Something not related to the legal stuff. Just to talk or not talk, whatever you need." Eliana paused, her heart drumming in her ears. Since Nicholas, she hadn't considered the possibility of stepping into a romantic space again. But something about James felt safe, genuine, hopeful. She accepted his invitation, a tiny flutter of excitement replacing the dread that had so long weighed her down. James chose a quaint Italian restaurant tucked away on a quiet side street in the West Village. From the moment they sat down, the atmosphere was comforting, soft candlelight, the aroma of fresh pasta, and the gentle hum of distant chatter. Eliana felt her nerves tingle, but in a good way, like she was stepping into a new world where hope was possible again. They talked about everything except her legal battle. Instead, the conversation swirled around childhood memories, favorite books, and the small acts of kindness that restore faith in humanity. Eliana found it refreshing to connect with someone on a more personal level, free from the flashbulbs of paparazzi or the artificial glamour of high society. At one point, the owner of the restaurant, a friendly older man named Bruno, recognized James. Apparently, James had volunteered his architectural expertise to help Bruno's cousin repair structural damage to a historical building in the neighborhood. Watching Bruno thank James with heartfelt warmth made Eliana's heart swell. She realized how different James was from Nicholas. No hidden motives, no twisted plots, just a man who found joy in doing good. By the end of the evening, Eliana felt lighter, as if an invisible weight had lifted. The sparks of potential that flickered between them were undeniable. Just when Eliana began to believe she could forge a new path, Nicholas unleashed a final, vicious attack in court. His legal team presented an altered narrative, suggesting Eliana had been promiscuous and unfaithful, dredging up old acquaintances who were paid to lie on the stand. The sheer audacity of their testimonies shocked Eliana's legal team. One so-called witness claimed Eliana had once attempted to seduce him at a party, a blatant fabrication designed to smear her character. Enraged, Eliana felt her composure wavering as these lies played out in front of the judge. The worst part was watching Nicholas pretend to be wounded by her betrayal, a nauseating performance from a man who had proven himself disloyal time and again. The courtroom descended into chaos, with both legal teams throwing accusation after accusation. Eliana's lawyers argued strenuously against the credibility of these witnesses, pointing out the suspicious timing of their testimonies and the noticeable inconsistencies in their stories. But the damage was done. Tabloid headlines quickly blared, "Vindictive wife," or "wronged woman." The Nicholas Legrand saga continues. Eliana found herself battling a new wave of public scrutiny, as though she had to justify her innocence in front of the entire world. In the days that followed, Eliana felt the sting of public opinion. Online forums brimmed with vitriol, and strangers questioned her character. She recognized that some people simply relished drama, feeding on the spectacle of a millionaire scandal. With each passing headline, she felt more cornered, more desperate for vindication. That's when James proved his loyalty in a way that touched her deeply. He quietly rallied a group of his architecture colleagues, many of whom had backgrounds in investigative research and forensics. They volunteered to analyze the evidence Nicholas's team had presented. Within a week, they uncovered multiple discrepancies, doctored timestamps, manipulated phone records, and even suspicious bank transfers to key witnesses. Eliana's legal team gleefully seized on this fresh evidence, compiling a detailed report that exposed Nicholas's entire smear campaign. Suddenly, the narrative changed. News outlets, initially eager to dramatize scandal, now picked up on the blatant forgery. The pendulum swung back in Eliana's favor. More than relief, she felt a rush of gratitude for James and the small community he'd built to support her. Where Nicholas had once wielded power unchecked, Eliana now saw that truth, and genuine alliances could hold even greater sway. As the legal case approached its final hearings, Eliana found her relationship with James blossoming in tandem. Their dinners became more frequent, evolving from casual meetups to heartfelt nights where they bared their souls about fears, dreams, and everything in between. For every anxious day in court, James offered a compassionate shoulder at night, a comforting presence that buoyed her spirits. Eliana often wondered if she was moving too fast, still in the process of finalizing her divorce from a man who had hurt her so profoundly. Yet every time doubts surfaced, she'd look into James's gentle eyes and find reassurance. Their connection felt genuine, untainted by hidden agendas or manipulation. One evening, James took her to a hidden rooftop garden atop an old building he'd helped restore. Surrounded by blooming vines and the soft glow of string lights, Eliana found herself opening up about childhood memories, her father teaching her to ride a bike, her mother's warm laugh in the kitchen. She realized she hadn't allowed herself to dwell on happy memories for a long time. In sharing these pieces of her past, she felt a profound sense of healing. James didn't just represent a new future, he helped her reclaim the person she was before the hurt. The final day of the divorce trial arrived with a swirl of nerves and anticipation. Eliana donned a simple yet elegant suit, determined to face Nicholas and his legal team with dignity. James offered her a reassuring smile from the gallery, a silent promise of support that steadied her jittery heart. Inside the courtroom, the judge recounted the key points of the case. He noted Nicholas's contradictory statements, the substantial evidence of infidelity, and the malicious attempts to discredit Eliana. He also acknowledged the phony testimonies, which had been effectively dismantled by Eliana's legal team. Nicholas's lawyers tried to salvage their position with last-minute objections, but it was clear they were fighting a losing battle. When the judge finally read his decision, the room fell silent. Eliana was granted the divorce with a fair division of assets. Nicholas was instructed to pay a significant settlement for emotional and reputational damages. The judge specifically denounced Nicholas's fraud, warning him that further legal scrutiny into his business dealings could follow. A hush blanketed the room. Nicholas's face twisted in outrage, but he held his tongue for once. Eliana exhaled, tears of relief sliding down her cheeks. It was over. The chain that had bound her to him was finally broken. With the verdict in her favor, Eliana felt a strange mix of exhaustion and newfound energy. She moved out of Ava's spare bedroom and into a quaint studio apartment in Brooklyn. It wasn't glamorous, but it was her space, somewhere she could decorate with her own style, fill with her own laughter, and shut out the world when she needed solace. Her lawyers suggested she take a break, maybe travel or focus on rebuilding her life. But Eliana found she wanted to return to meaningful work. She reached out to the non-profit where she'd once volunteered and was welcomed back with open arms. They were launching a new initiative to provide emergency assistance for women escaping abusive or unhealthy relationships, a cause that struck a chord deep within her. Eager to channel her pain into something constructive, Eliana accepted a part-time coordinator role. In her free time, she continued seeing James. They visited art galleries, strolled through Central Park, and discovered hole-in-the-wall bookstores. Occasionally, paparazzi cameras still clicked in the background, hoping for more scandal. But their photos told a different story now, a woman regaining her life, and a man quietly supporting her every step of the way. Even the tabloids began to lose interest as sensational headlines gave way to calm routine. Despite her steady progress, Eliana wasn't immune to lingering echoes of the past. From time to time, she'd catch herself scrolling through social media, inadvertently stumbling upon a photo of Nicholas partying in a Miami nightclub or jetting off to Ibiza with yet another model. The images dredged up conflicting emotions, anger, pity, and occasionally a flicker of hurt. Late one night, Eliana found herself on her balcony, staring at the Manhattan skyline. She remembered her first days in Nicholas's opulent penthouse, how she'd once marveled at the very same skyline. It felt surreal to recall how tightly she had clung to that life, how she'd persuaded herself that money and prestige were the hallmarks of happiness. But she also acknowledged her own growth. If nothing else, she was grateful for the lesson Nicholas's betrayal had taught her about self-worth. She no longer believed in illusions spun by gold-tinted promises. Now, she'd rather dwell in the realness of people and places that might lack polish but brimmed with authenticity. James was a testament to that. His quiet kindness resonated more deeply than any lavish gesture Nicholas had ever paraded in front of her. Though shadows of the past remained, Eliana found she could face them without fear. She was no longer defined by Nicholas's actions. Months later, while on a business errand for the non-profit, Eliana found herself at a charity gala, coincidentally one organized by a philanthropic branch of the Walt Disney Company. She was there to represent her organization in securing grants for domestic abuse survivors. Dressed in a simple black dress, she navigated the event with confidence she hadn't felt in years. Halfway through the evening, she spotted a familiar figure across the room. Nicholas, standing near the champagne fountain, engaged in animated conversation with a group of potential donors. Eliana's pulse quickened. She fought the urge to retreat, reminding herself she had every right to be there. Eventually, their eyes met. She watched as Nicholas's expression changed from surprise to something akin to longing. Without warning, he excused himself from his group and moved toward Eliana. Her heart pounded, not out of residual affection, but from the tension of confronting a ghost she thought she'd buried. He opened his mouth to speak, and for a moment, neither knew what to say. Eliana braced herself, expecting snide remarks or defensive excuses, but Nicholas simply said, "Eliana, can we talk?" Her instincts screamed caution, yet she remembered her newfound strength. This time, she was no longer the vulnerable, naive wife. She agreed, but on her terms and her turf. They found a quiet corner of the grand ballroom, where the music was a distant hum. Nicholas looked different, tired, somehow, despite the immaculate suit and confident posture. Eliana stood firm, her chin held high, eyes reflecting the composure she had earned through hardship. "I wanted to say, I'm sorry," Nicholas began, stumbling over words that Eliana never thought she'd hear from him. He confessed that his business ventures had suffered after their divorce. Investors pulled out, and legal scrutiny had forced him to dissolve some of his questionable deals. He hinted that his personal life was in shambles, two relationships built on glamour, and lies never lasted. He admitted he'd foolishly believed he could move on without consequences, but now realized he'd lost something irreplaceable. Eliana listened without interrupting, noticing the cracks in his once invincible facade. She felt no satisfaction in seeing him brought low, only a sense of distance, like she was observing a stranger. After a pause, she said quietly, "I appreciate the apology, Nicholas, but I've moved on. I hope you find peace, and maybe learn from this." Her words were measured, devoid of rancor. Nicholas nodded, regret etched in his eyes. If he had expected a chance to rekindle anything, her calm decisiveness made it clear that door had long since closed. Walking away from that conversation, Eliana felt lighter. She'd spent so many nights stewing in anger and betrayal. Now, hearing Nicholas voice his regret, she realized she had no desire for vengeance. The best closure was living a life free from the toxicity he represented. She had discovered a love rooted in honesty and shared values, a love with James, and she had found a renewed sense of purpose in her work. Later that evening, James arrived at the gala to pick her up. He had insisted on accompanying her home. The warmth of his hand around hers reassured her that she wasn't alone in facing her past. When Eliana mentioned her talk with Nicholas, James looked concerned, but she smiled. "I'm okay," she assured him. "Really, I am." They left the gala, and hailed a cab. As the city lights flickered by, Eliana found herself replaying the events of the evening. In a single conversation, she had revisited her darkest moments and emerged unscathed. If anything, it had reaffirmed her conviction that she deserved the happiness she was now allowing herself to feel. On that ride home, she closed the chapter on Nicholas Legrand for good, embracing the freedom of her own hard-earned future. With Nicholas firmly in the rearview mirror, Eliana's life found a gentle rhythm. She balanced her new responsibilities at the non-profit with quiet evenings spent cooking experimental recipes with James, dancing to old jazz records, or simply walking through the city. Each day felt like a small victory, a step further from the swirling turmoil that once defined her. At work, Eliana channeled her experiences into tangible outcomes. She expanded the non-profit's outreach programs, collaborated with local shelters, and organized workshops on emotional and financial independence. She wanted to help other women realize that leaving a toxic situation wasn't the end of their story, but the beginning of a more empowering narrative. Her personal transformation became an unspoken testament to what they could achieve. Meanwhile, James thrived in his architectural projects. Sometimes they'd visit a construction site together. Eliana marveled at how he combined practicality with creativity, designing spaces that not only sheltered people but also uplifted them. Their mutual commitment to making a positive impact formed a bond that grew deeper each day. In stolen moments of reflection, Eliana would find herself overwhelmed by gratitude. She had traversed heartbreak, betrayal, and public humiliation, only to discover a life so much richer in authenticity and love. A crisp autumn breeze swept through the city streets as Eliana walked hand in hand with James, heading toward a quiet park on the outskirts of town. She felt the warmth of his palm against hers, a comforting reminder of how far they had both come. The leaves overhead were ablaze in rich shades of crimson, orange, and gold, drifting softly to the ground with each gust of wind. It was the kind of afternoon that made even the busiest New Yorkers slow down and savor the fleeting beauty of the season. James guided her to a secluded area near a tranquil pond surrounded by tall oak trees. She could hear the soft rustle of leaves underfoot, paired with the distant chatter of a couple feeding ducks on the far side of the water. "I used to sit here when I was working on a community housing blueprint," James said, his voice full of nostalgia. Something about this view always brought me clarity. Eliana took a seat on a wooden bench, gazing at the water as it reflected the fiery hues of the foliage. She felt an inexplicable sense of calm, as if time had momentarily paused to let her breathe in the serene atmosphere. Absorbed in the vibrant colors dancing on the pond's surface, she almost didn't notice James shifting beside her. But then she heard him clear his throat, a soft, nervous sound that made her turn. She found him kneeling on the uneven grass, a small velvet box cradled in his palm. For an instant, the world seemed to stand still. The autumn air felt charged with anticipation, and her heart pounded in her chest. James looked up at her, eyes brimming with a tenderness she had once believed impossible after the pain of her first marriage. Her breath caught as he gently opened the box to reveal a simple yet elegant ring, its single diamond sparkling like a promise in the golden light. "Eliana," he began, voice trembling ever so slightly, "I've watched you overcome heartbreak and emerge stronger, kinder, and more determined than ever. I've seen how you care about people, whether it's the women at the non-profit or strangers you help on the street. You inspire me to be a better person every day. I can't imagine facing life's hardships or celebrating its joys with anyone else. Will you marry me?" A rush of warmth spread through Eliana, followed quickly by a surge of happy tears. She thought back to the last time she had said yes to a marriage proposal, a decision that had once led to heartbreak beyond anything she'd imagined. But this moment felt like night and day compared to that. Here was a man who had stood by her, not for show or status, but out of unwavering love. She could hardly keep her voice from shaking as she replied, "Yes, James, of course I will." Applause rose from a few onlookers who had paused their stroll to witness the scene unfold. Embarrassed yet elated, Eliana laughed through her tears, feeling a mix of relief, happiness, and an almost dizzying excitement about the road ahead. James slipped the ring onto her finger, and the metal felt cool against her skin, a tangible symbol of the second chance she had dared to believe in. After they both stood, James pulled her into a gentle embrace, pressing his forehead against hers. "Thank you for trusting me," he whispered, as if still in awe that she'd said yes. Eliana wrapped her arms around him, breathing in the scent of crisp leaves and the faint spice of his cologne, knowing with absolute certainty that she was choosing love again, this time with her eyes wide open, her heart finally free from the ghosts of her past. In the weeks following their engagement, a quiet sense of contentment settled into Eliana's life. For so long, she had endured a toxic whirlwind of betrayal and public scrutiny, her every step dogged by whispers about her ex-husband's outrageous scandals. Now, with Nicholas and his schemes firmly in the past, Eliana discovered the power of living a life built on genuine affection and shared ideals. Every morning felt like a fresh start, a gentle invitation to turn the page and focus on the future she was steadily creating. News of her engagement to James didn't break on the tabloids' front pages this time around. There was no reason for scandal anymore. Instead, the announcement spread through her close network of friends, family, and colleagues at the non-profit. Many had watched with empathy as she faced heartbreak, public ridicule, and intense legal battles. Seeing her find a second chance at love felt almost miraculous. Co-workers at the non-profit teased her good-naturedly about setting a date, curious about what kind of wedding someone as down-to-earth as Eliana might plan. In response, she'd simply smile, stating that she wanted a ceremony that reflected their shared commitment to making a difference in the world. Her personal life and professional endeavors seemed to converge in beautiful harmony. While she threw herself into work coordinating emergency resources for women escaping abusive or manipulative relationships, James was finalizing blueprints for a new community center set to open in a disadvantaged neighborhood. Often, they'd spend their lunches volunteering side by side, serving hot meals at a local soup kitchen or organizing charity auctions. These moments, although simple, reminded Eliana that true love was less about grand gestures and more about a mutual willingness to grow, support, and give back together. Even with all the progress, Eliana occasionally fought off old insecurities. In quieter moments, she would recall how completely she had once trusted Nicholas, only to have that trust dashed. But every time a flicker of fear arose, she'd remind herself of James's unwavering honesty and the everyday kindness he showed. From the smallest courtesy, like offering to run errands for her on busy days, to the larger acts of generosity he so naturally embodied. Rather than view her past as a reason to remain guarded, she chose to see it as a testament to the resilience she had painstakingly earned. Friends came from far and wide to visit Eliana at the cozy Brooklyn apartment she now called home. They noted how the spark had returned to her eyes, and how her laughter no longer carried that undertone of lingering hurt. Free from the shadow of her ex-husband's manipulations, she reveled in the simple joys of making dinner with James or curling up on the couch, discussing plans for the future. Sometimes, those conversations drifted to the notion of starting a family, an idea that filled her with both cautious excitement and the serene knowledge that any new chapter would be built on mutual respect and open communication. Perhaps the greatest triumph was how she began to speak openly about her journey, not as a cautionary tale, but as an example of overcoming adversity and finding renewed purpose. At a local women's shelter, she shared her story with a group of survivors, explaining how her darkest moments eventually led her to discover a love so profound and sincere that she could hardly believe it herself. Their tears, applause, and heartfelt hugs reassured her that her story could offer hope to others who felt trapped or broken by betrayal. In these myriad ways, Eliana found healing. She experienced happiness that went beyond fleeting joy, rooted in the conviction that her worth wasn't tied to anyone else's validation. The woman who had once been a victim of a millionaire's empty promises was now an advocate for others, a loving partner, and a testament to the fact that life's most crippling setbacks can pave the way for a radiant and authentic future. On a crisp spring afternoon, Eliana and James exchanged vows in a modest but beautiful ceremony held in a restored city park. Strings of fairy lights hung between the trees, and guests sat on simple wooden chairs adorned with wildflowers. As Eliana walked down the aisle, her heart soared at the sight of James standing beneath an arch of greenery, tears of joy in his eyes. Close friends and family gathered, clapping and cheering as they sealed their union with a tender kiss. In that moment, Eliana felt an overwhelming sense of peace. She had taken the heartbreak that once threatened to destroy her and transformed it into a stepping stone toward true love and self-discovery. Near the edge of the gathering, partly hidden by a tree, someone watched. Nicholas, uninvited, had appeared in a last-ditch attempt to see what he had lost. He stood there, regret etched onto his face, taking in the sight of a woman he had once controlled, now glowing with happiness in another man's arms. Eliana never even noticed him. As the newlyweds turned to face their loved ones, Nicholas vanished into the crowd, weighed down by the bitter realization that he had thrown away the best thing that could have ever happened to him. And so, in the wake of heartbreak and betrayal, Eliana not only found justice but also rediscovered her own strength, compassion, and capacity for love. What began as a nightmare of deceit evolved into a journey of self-discovery, reminding us all that life's most painful chapters can pave the way for our greatest transformations. Through courage, authenticity, and the kindness of an unexpected ally, Eliana charted a path toward genuine happiness, leaving her past and regrets behind, no longer defined by another's wrongdoing. Thank you for joining us on this emotional odyssey. If Eliana's story moved you, please show your support by clicking the like button, sharing this video with someone who might draw inspiration from it, and subscribing to our channel for more stories of resilience and redemption. Your engagement helps us continue creating content that uplifts and empowers.